So now that we learned about outputting dynamic values with this special curly brace syntax, we can use that same syntax to load our images in a different way or to point at those images in a different way. Now, of course, loading this image like this and displaying it works fine, as you can tell by the fact that the image is there. But this is actually not the best way of loading it. To be precise, this source attribute value is not the best way. Because here I'm pointing at the image in my src folder and there at the assets folder, but by loading it like this, the image might actually get lost once we prepare this React project for deployment. Now, deployment is something we'll take a look at later in the course, but as part of the deployment process, your entire code will be transformed, optimized, and bundled together, and image files, when loaded like this, might be ignored by that bundling process, and therefore they might get lost during deployment. In addition, if we include images differently, we can even take advantage of extra optimization steps, which we're not getting with this way of including them. So how should you then load and include images? Well, you should use an import statement. And you can, for example, import the React image, though this name here is totally up to you, from, and then you create a relative path from that file, so from the app.jsx file in this case, to the image file. So in this case, I dive into the assets folder, and then there it's this React core concepts PNG file. So I point at this file here, like this. And this approach might look rather strange, because importing an image file into a JavaScript file is not something you can normally do in JavaScript. But here this will work because of that same build process that will also make JSX code work. Basically, that build process will not just transform the JSX code, but also import statements like this. And also import statements like this here in the index.jsx file, by the way, where we import a CSS file, which also normally wouldn't work. But such imports do work in this project setup here, because the build process will make sure that the files we're importing here will be included in the final page and deployment package. And we can therefore use syntax like this to then use this React image, which we're loading like this, as a value for this source attribute by using single curly braces again. So by using this dynamic value syntax about which you learned. Here, the dynamic value for the source attribute is that image which we are importing like this. So here, this image in the end is a JavaScript object, you could say. Or to be precise, it's a JavaScript variable that will point at that image, that will include a path to that image, you could say. And it's therefore that variable, which includes that path, which we want to use as a value for this src attribute. And this here is then the syntax for doing that. What's really important here when using this dynamic value expression for attribute values is that you don't add quotes. You must omit those. Instead, you have the dynamic value, this curly brace syntax here, as a value right after that equal sign, not wrapped by quotes. And with that, you'll see that if you save everything and you reload, you still see that image here, so that still works, but we're now loading it in a more optimal way, thanks to this build process, which is part of this project, and this single curly brace syntax, which we can use in JSX to point at JavaScript values.